Welcome back, Florida Southern Moccasins, to Module 2, Week 2 of Esports Sponsorship Activation. So let's get right to it. So in this particular module, we're going to be covering, once again, how do game publishers make money? We're going to go much more in depth on that. What are the percentage revenue streams in the gaming esports industry? What is the rationale behind game publishers sponsoring their own tournaments? Because again, one of the unique things about esports is that the publishers own the content, they own the sport, but they're also very much involved in the sponsorship activation of their brand and their particular franchise. And I say that because there may very well be job openings for you with the game companies themselves in the area of activating their sponsorship through a particular tournament, league, or what have you. We'll look at ancillary in-house publisher sponsorships, most notably in the form of BlizzCon, which was very successful and cost a lot of money, and returned after the pandemic and now is canceled. But of course, with Activision Blizzard being taken over by Microsoft, there are earthquake-style changes that are occurring. And then we'll take a look at publisher benefits from crowdfunding tournaments. That on the surface might seem a little weird, crowdfunding a tournament, but what we're going to discover is that the largest cash prizes in the esports industry are through crowd-funded tournaments. Very bizarre. Again, why did you make the right decision? The game industry valuation in the United States alone is $1.333 trillion. So gaming is definitely an industry that you're wise to look into. And even when we take a look at across the world, especially in Asia, still very, very big. But the fact that a country like Sweden or France or even Israel, much smaller countries, are able to have such huge valuation for gaming is significant. Now, global brand investment in esports. This is getting very much to the heart of our course here. And what we are seeing is that brand investment in esports continues to rise, and rise, okay? So that, we're looking at a great deal of money that is going either through advertising or through sponsorship, but the vast majority of that is through sponsorship. And the reason it's going through sponsorship is you have, as a company, a much more direct input into where you want to put your money, whose eyeballs you want to reach, etc. Advertising, you could say, in esports is a digital version of shotgunning, okay? It might be advertising on Twitch in general. It might be advertising on YouTube in general, or Facebook in general, without the specification and the specificity that sponsorship allows you to have. Top 10 biggest gaming companies by gaming revenue. Sony is number one, although we're about to see that Sony is very much a company where it is in charge of its own sponsorship activation, followed by Microsoft, then Nintendo, and then Tencent, followed then by Activision Blizzard. And of course, we've got to add Activision Blizzard's $8.8 billion to Microsoft's $16.3 billion, and suddenly Microsoft now becomes number one. Then you've got EA, Epic, Take-Two, Ubisoft, and Bandai Namco. So getting back to a slide that we looked at before, where's the money in esports? Again, it's in China, number one, but the US is followed right behind that. And where is it? When it comes to esports sponsorship activation, game publishers are 63% of the money when it comes to esports, okay? Streaming platforms are not insignificant, but they also are not the biggest thing there, okay? So what we're looking at is that when it comes to sponsorship, game publishers really do continue to rule the roost in terms of their sponsorship, their brand advertisement, and what have you. You will notice as well that this income is dispersed over digital tools, over the various leagues and tournaments, although that's really minimal, especially during the pandemic. And teams, professionals, and streamers is basically 17% of the money that we see. Now, that's one of the reasons why we're going to be focusing very much on streamers and all that, and influencers, because if 64% of the money in esports is coming from the game publishers themselves, who are sponsoring things, and they're going to control their own destiny, where can we as brands have an impact? And the fact is, it's through the individual streamer, gamer, team, what have you. Now, this is the App Store share by game publisher revenue back in 2020, okay? The share of games publishers, when you take a look at it, was pretty significant. It was $0 to $100,000. When we take a look at the share of game revenue that was coming in there, it was pretty damn significant, all right? I mean, we're looking at, 1.5 million and more. And so what we find is that esports players are truly dedicated. And we can see that, let alone in the fact that when we take a look at free-to-play games generate more money through microtransactions than any other game. I mean, a game like Fortnite, which is free to play, generates $2 billion in revenue. That's from engaged players wanting to acquire a new skin, wanting to acquire a new attribute, skill, a new spell, you name it. So that microtransactions in esports are a much more significant portion of revenue than any place else. Now, when we take a look at individual game publishers, I've got to call your attention to Tencent. I mean, Tencent is outside of Sony and Microsoft now is one of the largest game companies in the world. It is based in China. And yet its investment portfolio is all over North America, all over the United States, frankly, all over the world. So you can see here, this is Tencent's investment portfolio. And while, of course, there are Chinese companies here, there are also other Asian companies, and there are a significant number of American companies. Tencent owns Riot Games. Okay, so I've always been a globalist, all right? I'm sort of a globalist with common sense. In other words, try to recognize when you're being taken advantage of, but also recognize that in anything with entertainment, it's a global market, okay? Which means you've got to be willing and eager to understand other cultures. I've been to Korea so many times, I consider it my second home. I just signed on, as I mentioned earlier, with Vietnam. Vietnam is a burgeoning market. When I ran the Entertainment Technology Center, I had a campus in Osaka, Japan. I had a campus in Adelaide, Australia. And I had outposts where students were studying in the United Kingdom, in Spain, in Portugal, in Singapore, and what have you. And I'm a globalist primarily because I like food, to be honest with you. I like a different cuisine, but also because the one thing about digital media and gaming is it's a universal. It's the universal language of young people. And so that's one of the reasons why I encourage those of you that are involved in business or gaming to really become globalists in the sense of understanding how they attribute to your market, okay? Now, here we're taking a look at overall esports stats for 2023. $181,155,329.71 of prize money. Total tournaments, folks, 3,627. Total active players, basically 25,000. The mean tournament prize pool, $50,000. The mean earnings per player, remember there's 25,000 players, the mean earning, the average was $7,400. The median tournament prize pool looks like a scant $3,800, but there were 3,627 tournaments, which means the median earnings per player is $888. This is all data that you have got to digest, all right? And intrinsically in this, you can see that obviously there are many different tiers of tournaments. Some are going to be gigantic, some are going to be, middling, some are going to be, peanuts, all right? But you're the one that has to ascertain this. You're the one that has to look at this particular slide and realize, gee, how much money is being offered by each one of these different games or franchises, and how will that impact your company when you seek to activate your sponsorship with the right target demographic? Okay. Now, leading esports tournaments worldwide as of May of 2024, what do we see? The international. Okay. The international remains huge, gigantic. And it has always been that case and is always going to continue to be that case because of the game, the country, and the prize pool. All right. Far behind, we find Fortnite, and then we suddenly find Riyadh Masters. Okay. Riyadh is the capital of Saudi Arabia. We're going to be talking about global government involvement in esports later on in this class, because that's something that you're going to want to pay attention to. But it all comes back to, how does the esports industry work again? You've got the game publishers. And the game publishers are the ones that are working with tournament operators, what are called TOs, tournament organizers, unless they are the actual organizer itself. And all of this leads to the esports organization that feeds off of the games and the game publishers, and also is directly influenced by and needs the TOs, the tournament organizers. So it is an ecosystem. It's a constant ecosystem, which is really no different than you find in television, and you find in movies, and you find in music, especially in the evolving music publishing industry. Now, when we take a look at game publisher fees, we see that there's a lot more game publishers out there than the original slide I showed you, which means there's a lot more jobs for all of you. So these fees primarily come in the form of licensing, all right? A game publisher tends to only push licenses on larger tournaments that generate at least a decent amount of revenue. Tier 1 tournaments for sure, some tier 2 tournaments, okay? But the fact of the matter is, every time you buy a game or pay to download a game, that is in essence a fee that you're paying to the publisher. Now we take a look at here, esports tournament landscape. You have the tournament organizers, all right? Some of these are third parties that are putting on tournaments. Others are the game publishers themselves, okay? Others are game publishers that own the tournament organizers, which we're gonna learn about pretty shortly. Then you've got the streaming platform, again, the players and the teams, and that's all fueled by the game publishers and developers. And then all of them rely on the sponsors. So the sponsors are the ones that are looking at everyone above this pyramid. Now let's take a look at this. This is the tournament growth cycle. And let's just focus on the overall key takeaways for leagues and game publishers. Game publishers largely generate their esports revenue through the tournament flywheel outlined above or to the left here, which is largely a dance between tournament costs and game-related product sales. Now, leagues, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, but I'm going to touch upon them here. On the other hand, they approach tournaments as individual profit opportunities, which balance arena costs and ticket sales plus sponsorships. And the game publishers supply the games that independent leagues organize tournaments around. Now, independent leagues boost those games' off-season relevance and competitive scenes. So you've got to take a look at the tournament growth cycle, what's called the flywheel, to understand why some tournaments are only online, why some tournaments are in person. And if they're in person, then they really become event organizers, okay? Now, let's take a look here at Esports World Cup, which was held in the summer of 2024 in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. This is an example of a prize pool. Now, the prize was set by the TO, the tournament organizer, which in this case happened to be Saudi Arabian business interests. But you will notice that the prize money is broken down into a prize pool. So the winner got $7 million. All right, already one of the ways to become famous is to outdo the competition. And the Saudis know this, so they're offering the winner $7 million. Not only that, the runner-up is going to get $4 million. Whoever finishes third gets $2 million, fourth $1.5 million, fifth $1 million. So winners 1 through 5 each are walking away with $1 million. 6 through 16 are all walking away with 6 figures. So one way as a sponsor to get yourself in the game is to outdo the competition in terms of prize. This is part of the Saudi government wanting to make sure that it becomes the big player. Where have we seen this as well? Golf, right? In golf, we've seen this taking place before our eyes, where the Saudis have established their own professional golfing league and have hired away golfers from the PGA, all through money. But this has been alive and well in esports for years now, because when Mixer came on the scene by Microsoft, what did they do? They hired Ninja and Shroud away through money. It didn't work. And then we find that the same thing goes on now between YouTube and Facebook, vying for individual streamers to leave or at least expand their presence and their streaming on their particular sites. And it's all done by luring them away with money. Okay. Now, let's take a look at something like the Call of Duty League. The Call of Duty League has been growing tremendously and is an excellent example of doing it right, okay? But now when we take a look at the number of tournaments that are going on, take a look at this, okay? This shows that as a marketer, as someone who's got to figure out where you're going to sponsor, you've got to take a look at what competition is occurring in the form of tournaments. Week 1, well, we got LOL, we got Mobile Legends, we got another one, TBA, and we got Dota 2. Week 2, we've got Dota 2, Mobile Legends. Where are we going to sponsor? What are we going to do? That's going to come down to your analysis of the target audience. Here, publishers most engaged in their franchise tournaments: Ubisoft, Epic, Activision Blizzard, which means Microsoft, Nintendo, Riot Games, and EA. So now we are looking at sponsorship activation where the sponsor is the game publisher. Now, does this mean you can't get involved? Of course it doesn't mean you can't get involved. It means that these game companies, these publishers, are going to be looking for marketers who understand esports, which is why you're studying this class and why you're getting your degree in business from Florida Southern. Okay, so let's take a look at Riot Games. The Esports World Cup is set to host a League of Legends tournament in 2024, marking a key shift by developer Riot Games. In other words, Riot Games is going, gee, if we hook up with the Saudis and what they're promoting as the Esports World Cup, we are able to basically still control our game, but have somebody else provide tremendous prize pool for this. We can also see this at work with Valorant, okay? Valorant is also an extremely popular game that is looking for global partners because global events raise the bar and the showcase of Valorant. And these publishers want to become truly global players, which is one of the reasons why I figured it very important to include an entire module on global development, global government development, what have you. Now, going back to the Call of Duty League, we see what's going on here with their 2024 schedule. There's Major 1, Major 2, Major 3, Major 4. This is basically one of the brilliant things about esports, and the fact that they are essentially a decentralized league. They are able to create a host of very important majors or very important tournaments that are going to draw eyeballs and at the same time are going to create a tremendous amount of drama, okay? And so we're going to be getting into centralized and decentralized leagues in just a little bit. But I also mentioned ancillary activities, which brings to mind BlizzCon. If you've never been to BlizzCon, assuming it's going to continue, you want to put it on your bucket list. And that's because it's an incredible display of a publisher showcasing the many franchises, the many games that it has, and also celebrating user-generated content, especially in the form of cosplay. Now, BlizzCon last year occurred over November 3rd, November 4th at the Anaheim Convention Center. It was absolutely fantastic. Was able to address, the fact that even though the Overwatch League died, Overwatch itself didn't die. There's Overwatch 2 and what was next there. And you'll notice it focused on Warcraft, Hearthstone, World of Warcraft, Diablo 4. It revels in its franchises and allows individuals to come, dressed in cosplay, celebrating their favorite players from these games. Now, oddly enough, BlizzCon announced that it was not going to hold its annual fan convention this year. After careful consideration over the last year, we at Blizzard have made the decision not to hold BlizzCon in 2024. Instead, we'll be holding other smaller tournaments and events throughout the year that'll be mentioned and participating in other trade shows such as Gamescom. This has got Microsoft hands all over it. The fact of the matter is, BlizzCon itself didn't make money, all right? It was, if anything, it wasn't even a loss leader because these games were around. It was basically a party thrown by the publisher, Activision Blizzard, to show its appreciation of its fans, of its games. Microsoft is not that company. So it is not coincidental that the year Microsoft takes over Activision Blizzard, they decide to postpone BlizzCon. And I can only hope this is not an indication of things to come. But when we take a look at sponsorship done by publishers, you've got to take a look at Nintendo. Nintendo holds everything close to the chest, okay? They love Mario Kart, they love Splatoon 3, but all of these championships are being run, sponsored by the game company itself. The same with Nintendo Live 2023 in Seattle. In fact, Nintendo's training program is based in Seattle, okay? So that something like Super Smash Brothers Ultimate, what have you, is all being run and sponsored by Nintendo itself. And we find that Sony is doing something very similar, especially with the Show 23, its Major League Baseball game. Okay, Sony is another company that is loath to let anyone do its sponsorship activation other than its own people. And as a Japanese company, even though they're Sony North America, it's kind of tough for you to get in there. But the fact of the matter is that they are very focused on controlling their brand. Okay. Sony, more specifically PlayStation, is though set to acquire Repeat.gg, standing for good game, right? Now, Repeat.gg is a platform that hosts and tracks esports tournaments, a purchase that falls in line with Sony's continued interest in all things esports, really made manifest with its acquisition of Evo, the world's largest fighting game event last year. So Repeat.gg is designed to be as accessible as possible so that anyone can organize and present their event in an easy-to-read fashion. But this is also giving Sony tremendous data. Right? It's giving Sony tremendous insight into who's playing their games, where they're playing their games, when they're playing their games, etc. So according to Games Industry, the platform, i.e. Repeat.gg, has hosted over 100,000 tournaments to date with over 2.3 million participants. And indeed, it's pretty much the most used technology as far as esports tournaments go. And what is Sony saying? We want it. Okay. Now we go to the international. Okay. This is Valve. It's one of the biggest annual events in esports, and the event is currently offering a crowd-funded prize pool of $33 million. Now, the event is a championship tournament for Dota 2, which is a popular free-to-play game that's been around for more than a decade. I mean, there's nothing new about Dota 2, but 18 teams from around the world have qualified for the tournament, which starts where? In Shanghai, China, on August 15th. And the winning team will take home more than $15 million, turning the champions into instant millionaires. But it's crowd-funded. In other words, the players of Dota 2 so love the game and are so invested in the game that they are providing the funding for it. It is a brilliant move on the part of Valve. Okay. Now, crowdfunding as it relates to esports is often associated with prize pools for tournaments, as several tournament organizers have figured out that it can be a cost-efficient method to provide attention-grabbing dollar figures. Let's delve more deeply into this. Valve's premier annual Dota 2 tournament. It made headlines with its prize pool crowdfunding approach as it raised some of the biggest in esports history. The largest campaign for the international was in 2021 with $28 million towards the tournament's total, to which Valve adds an additional 1.6 million. Okay? I mean, think about it. This is a game that is owned by Valve, and Valve's contribution to the international is a paltry $1.6 million. Okay? The rest is through crowdfunding. Only 25% of all revenues generated through the crowdfunding campaign via in-game purchases goes towards the prize pool. Valve pockets the other 75%. So it's a very weird accounting going on here for crowdfunding. In other words, the more you play Dota 2, the more you do in-game purchases, a portion of that is considered to be crowdfunding that is then applied to the tournament, the international prize pool. But meanwhile, Valve is pocketing the vast majority of that, and then as sort of as a good-natured thing is saying, well, we're also going to give $1.6 million to the international. I mean, Valve gets you gotta give them credit for some incredible self-promotion here. Okay. Now, other game publishers that sponsor their own tournaments are Electronic Arts. My campus in Silicon Valley, when I was at Carnegie Mellon, the Entertainment Technology Center, was in a whole wing of Electronic Arts headquarters in Redwood City. I mean, I loved it. I loved it there. My students loved it there. But I'll be the first to say that EA was late getting into esports, very late. And its primary platform remains Madden. And Madden, EA has never figured out exactly how to turn Madden into an esport. But they do, in fact, have a tournament which is done by players of Madden 24 that is held at the same time as the Super Bowl. And so that, in fact, is their venture into esports. Another one, though, is their new FC24. Okay. Now, remember, if you don't know, last year, FIFA broke off with EA. EA used to produce the FIFA soccer game every year. FIFA wanted a bigger cut of the purse, I mean, of the revenue. EA balked on it. So FIFA said, you know what, we'll do it ourselves. This reminds me of when Marvel, before Marvel was acquired by Disney, Marvel used to license the Avenger platforms and its various comic book characters to Disney. Disney would make the movie. Disney would make a lot of money, billions from it, and all Marvel got was its licensing fee. Marvel wised up and said to Disney, you know what? We can make movies too. We don't have to license them to you anymore. We will make our own movies because everything is decentralized now in Hollywood. There are movie directors, there are screenwriters. We can hire them ourselves. And that's what Marvel did. And so all of a sudden, they started to make their own Spider-Man movies and such. What happened? Disney read the tea leaves, so they bought Marvel for $4 billion. Okay? You can see the logic that's going on here. So EA says, I don't want to lose the soccer players, so we're going to create Football Club 24. Meanwhile, FIFA is going on its own path. All of this leads us to a discussion of leagues, electronic versions of sports leagues, and what is a centralized league and what is decentralized. In traditional sports, there are basically two core league models. The first is a decentralized league. The PGA Tour, the International Tennis Federation, NASCAR, these are decentralized leagues. What does that mean? This means there are a number of independently operated events that use a common rule system that is administered by a regulatory body, for example, the PGA. In most cases, these events wrap together under a broader league table in the form of points that are ascribed to these select events. And they culminate in marquee events, such as the Masters, with participants chosen based on league table or other related systems. That's why we have a lot of points per tournament and what have you. Then there are centralized leagues. For example, the NFL, the Major League Baseball, NBA. These are centralized leagues as opposed to decentralized leagues. Now, in a centralized league, such as the NBA or MLB or NFL, all the matches, all the tournaments in that league are managed by a core body that defines everything from the rules to the schedules to the compensation. They both collect the majority of revenues and they set and enforce guidelines on the rest. So at the extreme, we see globally centralized leagues. In soccer, football, for example, FIFA doesn't oversee a single league, unlike, say, the NBA, but it effectively oversees all leagues, conferences, and organizations in the sport. So while member organizations manage day-to-day operations, FIFA owns all the rules and administers inter-party decision-making. Esports is different, okay? Because while we see leagues across each of the aforementioned models, all competitive play is ultimately dependent on the game's publisher. Most simply, independent leagues, events, and tournaments, whether for or not for profit, do not have the right to operate, let alone broadcast or to at-home audiences. They can only do so as allowed explicitly or tacitly. Tacitly means hands off, by a publisher. But all it takes is a publisher's copyright claim, usually in the form of a cease and desist order or policy change, to shut down these independent tournament organizers and operators. This is true even if the games are played online via local connections, and certainly in the case of remote online play via, and certainly in the case of remote online play, all gameplay is ultimately administered, refereed by the publisher's online services. This means that publishers are effectively co-running the tournament or league, even if you don't know it. So what are we saying here? We're saying that in esports, we have both centralized and decentralized leagues and tournaments. So publishers will take up to 50% of revenue that is directly attributed to their esports leagues. What this means in terms of a franchise is, after buying a franchise fee from a publisher, the teams effectively, but not literally, pay a royalty back to the publisher. This is the reverse of, say, the NBA, in which the league collects revenues in order to allocate it to the teams. It isn't the business nor a profit-seeking one. It operates for the owners. In esports, the league body collects all revenue, then keeps the largest share of it before allocating the residual to the teams, which is one of the reasons why Overwatch League died, okay? This turned out to be too onerous, okay? For example, in Activision Blizzard's leagues, the 50-50 revenue share occurs after the publisher recoups its own esports costs, which it turned out to be difficult to do. Only then does the money go to the teams who hope to cover their own costs. Worse still, the teams have no control over this center office spending. So a league can decide to spend an extra $100 million on season marketing or other expenses, all of which will be immediately recouped out of the league revenues at the expense of the team revenue share, at their sole discretion, and with the game's IP also benefiting from the added budget. That's one of the reasons why the franchise leagues in esports have found such difficult going on. And whereas something like NBA 2K has been successful, we're going to delve into this more deeply. But the bottom line is, esports leagues are not electronic versions of sports leagues. It is important to emphasize that matches can only be played with the rules, options, gameplay, physics, items, and characters that the publisher offers. As many of you already know, if your favorite hero or champion in a game is removed, you can't use them. If you loved a limited time event that's no longer offered, too bad. If a rule, an item, or map changed, you have no choice but to adapt them, because you can't run Call of Duty without Activision Blizzard. You can only play the specific versions of Call of Duty that they allow. Okay? So the main thing you want to take away from this is that esports is a blend of centralization and decentralization. Usually the decentralization means that whatever you're doing is something that the esports publisher is happy with. It's promoting the game, and it's not infringing on our right to make money from it. And so that is the lecture for Module 2. Again, the PowerPoint is included as well so that you can go over it. And the one thing I will recognize is that I provide a lot of resources. Am I expecting you to access every one of those YouTube or those external URLs? Not really, but it would pay it would help you a great deal if you at least looked at a fair number of them. Okay. All right. See you next for module 3.